Moonshine Jesus, nobody in the sky. Moonshine Jesus, baby, don't lie. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show, brought to you by progressivechristianity.org, a wonderful place to get all your progressive Christian resources. I hope that you will follow both progressivechristianity.org and the Moonshine Jesus Show on social media. Today, we have an exciting show because we are going a little back to the past to talk about Back to the Future, one of our all-time favorite movies, right? Are you excited, Mark?
I could not be more excited, man. I can't wait. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be so much fun. I don't think I need to tell you this today, but of course we will have spoilers. But I mean, if you haven't seen Back to the Future by this point, sorry, there's just really nothing we can do. That's really all on you. But we're going to start off as usual with our drinks.
Indeed.
So do you have an interesting drink today, Mark?
Well, I don't know if you would call it interesting. I tried to get bottled Pepsi because we see bottled Pepsi throughout the show. Yeah. And you can't find it in bottles anywhere. So Marty ordered a Pepsi free, right? Because the guy says, if you want a Pepsi, kid, you're going to have to pay for it. So I couldn't get a Pepsi free, but I do have a bottle of Pepsi Zero that I then spiked with rum, as the rum and Coke that you might have had when you were in high school, since we spent so much time in high school here. So I have a Pepsi almost free rum, Pepsi and rum. How about you? What'd you decide to go with?
I love
I'm drink it straight from the bottle too.
Good, you should. So one of the things that I think is the most iconic about the 1950s is the 50s malt shop, and we see some of the teenagers drinking malts. So I decided to have a spiked malt today. So just a vanilla malt that's spiked with vodka. So cheers.
And vodka is what Moraine, Marty's mom, was drinking at the opening of the show.
Yeah. That's what I thought about. That's why I chose it, of course. Not just because it mixed well here. Cheers to you, Mark. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to dive in. So let's make like a tree and get out of here.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You've joined us for our Geek Out segment of the show. I love that you closed the last segment with that quote from Biff. Just for what it's worth, Thomas Wilson, the actor that played Biff, actually he made that line up. He came up with it himself. Just thought it fit his character perfect. So he improvised that. It was fun to go. So like you said, I don't know what rock someone would have to be living under to not know about Back to the Future. But, you know, you just never know. And so as we do at the beginning of this segment, I'm going to give us a quick recap. For those who don't know, it's a romantic comedy time travel adventure in which our lead protagonist, Marty McFly, accidentally finds himself transported back to his parents' high school, and he ends up being the object of his mother's affections rather than his father being that. And quite to his dismay, he learns that his mother is significantly more adventurous than she claimed that she was in her high school years. And his father, he finds out, lacks the self-confidence to get her attention. So ultimately, it takes Marty's intervention to get his mom and his dad to kiss at the prom, getting them back together, and saving the space-time continuum. So that's my quick little recap for those who somehow aren't initiated to this. And I'm going to start out with this question, Caleb. Is this one of the best movies ever made, or is it the best movie ever made? And follow-up question, why is it the best movie ever made?
Okay, so it's certainly one of the best movies ever made. It's definitely in my top 10. I love Back to the Future, and I grew up watching Back to the Future. I've seen it so many times, but it's actually been a while since I've watched it, and so I went back through last night and watched it. And I think one of the reasons that it continues to be such a fun movie is because it's even more fun on the rewatch, and I think it deals with some kind of fun questions like, hey, are our parents really who we think they are, and what were they really like? And I think going back and living through that is something that's fun to experience. And I mean, time traveling in a DeLorean. What couldn't be fun about that? I mean, it's a fun movie.
And
a lot of fun.
The DeLorean wasn't the original plan for the time travel. At first, it was this kind of refrigerator on the back of a flatbed truck. And that's what's interesting about that they had Pepsi throughout the movie, because in order for it to work, it had to be present in a nuclear explosion, and there had to be Coca-Cola involved. Like, that was how it was written. And so it's interesting. It was Coca-Cola, and now it's a whole Pepsi kind of movie.
Pepsi?
Anyway.
I like the DeLorean. I think the DeLorean was the right choice.
They ultimately chose the DeLorean because it was more transportable, and because when he crashes into the barn, it looks more like it could be misinterpreted as a UFO with the doors open and all of that kind of thing. So that's how they ended up getting to the DeLorean on that. So you started on it. So what is it that the reason you think this is such a great movie, even almost 40 years later? Or are there other parts you think that really caused this to hold up so well over a crazy amount of time? And it's a very 80s movie. I mean, it's very 80s.
It is.
But most 80s movies, when you look back up on them, you're kind of like, that's fine. It's okay. This one just feels almost as fresh 40 years, almost 40 years later. What do you think that is?
It's kind of like Indiana Jones movies too, where you go back and you're like, okay, the special effects are super dated, but that's like a part of the charm and a part of the things that you love about it. And so as Marty's like hand is disappearing, I mean, it's clearly kind of cheesy 80s effect, but who cares? I mean, that's one of the things that you love about it. And so I think part of what makes it so special is that it's very 80s and going back. And I think there's a lot of nostalgia for a whole bunch of us. I think old millennials like myself, Gen Xers, I think we all kind of have this nostalgia about the 80s anyway. Right. And so I think the fact that it is very 80s is part of it. I think also that, okay, we're almost 40 years from when the movie was made, and Marty goes back about 30 years in time. And so I think it's kind of watching Back to the Future is kind of like Marty going back in time. For some of us, it's kind of the same experience watching the movie that Marty has. I think that's one of the things that's so fun about it, or at least it is for me. One of the things that I like about it.
No, I agree. I think it's really fun. I also just think it's one of the rare perfectly made movies. And I'm not saying that lightly. And I'm not talking about the storyline. I'm talking about in terms of movie making, the soundtrack, the music that they bring in from Huey Lewis, that he wasn't going to do it first and finally was convinced to do the songs, and the way that it works and fits in. The editing on this movie is unbelievable. The pacing is pretty much flawless throughout. You never feel like it's going too fast. You never feel like it's dragging. The visuals are incredible. The set design is perfect. It is so well choreographed. There's every little thing that happens in any scene turns out to be important later. It relates back to itself. Even little tiny things like the opening scene in Doc Brown's laboratory, and all the clocks. And there's the one clock with the classic black and white silent with a man hanging off of the arm of a clock.
I never noticed that until this time. Yeah. So I've been watching this for 40 years, and this was the first time that I noticed that. And I'm like, wait, has that been there the whole time?
And that stuff is throughout the movie. Like there's almost in every scene, there's a handful of things that are very small, really not even calling attention to, that pay off later in some way. And I think that's part of what makes it such a rewatchable movie, because there's always something new to discover. It's just, I absolutely love that. an interesting thing about the story, and I love in the making of this. So they write the first script, and the first script doesn't really go over very well. They write the second script, which is getting closer to what we have now. Believe it or not, Back to the Future was rejected 40 times by the big studios.
Oh, what?
Right.
How?
I mean, can you
Why?
imagine? Yeah.
No.
It was absolutely unbelievable. How in the world could you? Well, I guess it is a very visual movie, so maybe it just wasn't coming off of the screenplay so well. But although it was nominated for an Oscar for best screenplay, original screenplay, didn't win. It did win for sound editing, but it's weird that it never. But it also is a great lesson of how important it is if you believe in something, stick with it and keep going, because if they hadn't have done it, we wouldn't have had Back to the Future, man. And how sad would that have been?
It would have been terrible. And I mean, it made a lot of money too, which, I mean, it was not a very big budget. I think it was the
biggest that year. I think it made the most money that year. Yeah.
And so
$210 million, which in the 80s was a lot of money for a movie.
Yeah, that's huge. That's an enormous income. So it's a lot of fun. One thing I learned recently, Mark, that you probably knew, but I didn't know, was that they filmed most of this movie with someone else playing Marty McFly.
Particularly the first part of it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the guy from Mask.
Eric Stoltz. Eric Stoltz was, and he filmed for 4 solid weeks the role of Marty McFly. And one of the main people who was involved in this was Spielberg, said, just insisted, Eric Stoltz is the guy, I promise you. And so they pushed it on Zemeckis, and Zemeckis took him, but it just didn't work out. It was never working out. And the last week, the word is that they found out that Michael J. Fox was going to be available. And that was part of the problem. He wasn't available because of the shooting, and he was shooting Teen Wolf at the same time while he was doing Family Ties, and he just wasn't going to be available. And so they found out he was going to be available. There was still going to be a week, so they didn't tell Eric Stoltz. There's actually a little bit of Stoltz won't even talk about it. No matter who tries to get him to talk about it, he won't even talk about it anymore. They didn't tell him for, I think, about a week when they knew, and so even the scenes that he was in. They would focus on close-ups of the other actors so that they could come back and shoot Marty's Michael J. Fox's Marty and edit it all back in. So yeah, there was 4 weeks of it where it was a completely different person, and I've seen footage of it. It really doesn't work. He plays it like a drama, and it's like it doesn't work that way. And that's what Zemeckis was telling him. Zemeckis was like, okay, when you cross the street, take a little bit of a stumble. And he was like, well, I wouldn't take a stumble. I would just walk across the street. He's like, no, it's going to humanize you. You need to do that. It's just a battle, it sounds like.
I think one of the things that makes it work, right, is that Michael J. Fox is incredibly charismatic and lovable and funny, and he just has this natural way. But anything he is ever in, he just kind of exudes that, and he's fun to watch. He draws you in, and so it's hard to imagine what this movie would have even been like, and it probably wouldn't have been a success. So the other actor, Mark, that I heard was kind of interesting to work with was Crispin Glover. Have you heard the stories about Crispin Glover on set?
Absolutely. That was actually a really big issue on the set. He was, I'm just going to say it, he was a weirdo on the set. Like when they're in the cafeteria, and there's the shot of Marty trying to convince him to go talk to Lorraine and ask her out. For some reason, Crispin kept intentionally taking himself out of frame and then coming back in. And sometimes he'd go out of frame and mess his hair up and then come back in with different hair. And Zemeckis kept going, man, you can't do that. You're going to screw up. Even the editors aren't going to be able to fix this. And it was like every scene he was like that over and over again. So much so that when they wrote the script for the second Back to the Future, I know this is a geeking out segment, and you're talking to a big Back to the Future geek. So when they wrote the second screenplay, at first they wrote him completely out. He was dead in all timelines. That was a big part of the story, that he was dead in all time. And they recast him with a person, and they used a face mold of Crispin to put on the new actor, and
that was dramatic.
Yeah, it was the first time anyone had tried to do that, use the image of someone else in a movie that wasn't in the movie. And it became a big issue between Crispin Glover and Zemeckis. And they didn't talk for a long time after that. There was a $720,000 lawsuit, something like that was settled over it.
Yeah.
But Zemeckis did finally recast Glover in one of his animations where they capture animation, and I can't remember. And they kind of buried the hatchet, and they all got along, and it was much better. And they worked together pretty well. Beowulf was the one that he was in. So they did finally repair the breach, but it took decades to get over it.
I hear that there was a lot of like examination of the character too. Like, well, what if my character didn't walk through the door? And it would be like, well, but the script says he walks through the door. Right. That's what you do: walk through the door.
Exactly. Yeah. It was really difficult. And going back to Eric Stoltz, he's a character. He is one of those actors that has to embody the character. Yeah. So on set, he never got out of character. So everybody had to call him Marty. If they called him Eric, he wouldn't talk to them. He would ignore them. Like, it was just so many weird things. And then actually Lorraine got recast too.
Oh.
The original Lorraine was significantly taller. See, Eric Stoltz was 6 foot. Michael J. Fox was 5'4" or 5'5", and so the original actress was too tall, so they had to recast her so that they would have somebody that would fit with size a little bit better with Michael J. Fox. So there was a lot of early recasting to make this come together and become the movie that it was, that we all love and adore so much. But it's quite a journey to get there. So one last question.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is because Zemeckis and his co-writer were known for kind of nostalgia films before this? They had done a couple that had that in it. Is this a nostalgia film, or do you think it's a critique of nostalgia films?
Ooh. This should have been the make me look stupid question.
Dang it! I wasted a question.
I think maybe a critique of them. I think a looking back and saying, hey, things weren't quite as rose colored as we thought they were, and the film can do that too.
Yeah, I very much think they did. You know, when he first gets back to the 1955, the happy bouncy Mr. Sandman, bam, 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 starts playing, and it's all of a sudden the city square is beautiful, and it's so pristine, and everyone's just walking around on a nice Sunday afternoon. But real quickly we start seeing, racist characters. We start seeing horrific misogyny and all kinds of terrible things. So yeah, I really do think they were very intentionally trying to say, hey, look, nostalgia isn't everything. Like, matter of fact, you got Lorraine saying, well, I was this kind of person. Like, nostalgia actually frequently misremembers for the sake of trying to make things better. So I think is one of the other brilliant things this show does. All right, we can go on and on, except for the fact that we're running out of time at this segment. So as much as I could geek out for another 2 hours with useless information about Back to the Future, I will not do it. We will take a quick break and come back on the other side and delve into some of the political and theological issues that come up with the film.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we are talking about Back to the Future. one of, if not the best movies of all time.
Yeah, maybe.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing that I have never done before is watch this movie thinking about theology and
Ah,
politics.
yeah,
It has been so kind of just embedded in my life that
yeah.
it was kind of fun to go through and think about the theology that was in the midst of Back to the Future. So, as you just mentioned a minute ago, Mark, we see 1950s America, and we see some troubling issues with
Mm.
race and all. What do you think is going on here? Do you think it does a good job of accurately depicting what race relations were like in the 1950s? And is the film guilty of casting any broad strokes and racial stereotypes itself?
Yes, yes, yes. No, I mean, a lot of questions there.
That's
I do.
that's in honor of you, Mark.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much.
You always
Yeah,
ask me a multi-part question,
absolutely,
and so I just throw them
brilliant.
all
It's
in.
really, it's only fair, man. It's only fair.
I know,
No,
right?
I do think that I don't think it's a fair representation. Oddly, I think that they may have painted a better picture than what it really was,
Mhm.
all the while also doing a horrible job at how they handled it. I mean,
Mhm.
there's been critiques of, oh, it takes a white man to come back and teach Barry how to play a song.
Mhm.
And there's a whole argument about time stuff on that. But there's some pieces that they weren't paying close enough attention to and weren't really um, trying to do in a better way. And I think Goldie is a great example of
Mhm.
a character that's kind of an overblown caricature of someone, while the other characters that were in the film really weren't so overblown. They were weird and different, but they weren't a caricature the way that Goldie was presented. So they could have handled it better. They should have handled it better. And they did handle it better than some 80s movies did, but that doesn't excuse the choices they made. I mean, what did you think about
Yeah, so Goldie was the one that was overly problematic for me
it? Hmm.
because they go into the malt shop
Right,
place, and we see kind of the wise black man trope
right.
where Goldie comes in and offers George advice to stand up to Biff,
Mhm.
and then disappears. And so
Right.
I felt like that was kind of that was even though I think they were trying to be empowering, showing that he was one day going to be the mayor of Hill
Right. A problem
Valley. That
solver.
Right, but
Right.
ultimately what
But
they did was play into a traditional trope of the
yep.
wise black man that I
Yep.
felt like was kind of inherently racist while trying
Absolutely.
to talk about racism. Another
Yeah.
place that I think you mentioned the dance scenes, but I think also the Libyan terrorists. We see
That
kind
was
of
incredible.
caricature of Libyans and
That's fair.
as if they're all
Yeah.
terrorists. So I think
Now,
that
yeah.
there was some of
I
that going on.
misspoke. That they obviously were also one of the other places where it was a clear caricature and it was an unfair
Yeah.
one, and it was meant to be degrading, really.
Right. Yes. And so I think that there are some of those things going on, and it was. I think it's important for us to realize that.
Hmm.
One of the other things that kind of caught my eyes and ears this go round
Yeah.
is George, Marty's dad, and
Right.
he doesn't want to stand up to Biff. And there's a line at the beginning where he says, Biff is my supervisor, and I'm not really good at confrontation. And whenever I listened to that, it got me thinking about how we relate to each other and
Mm.
how people relate to each other in churches in particular. And I mean, Mark, it isn't avoiding confrontation what nice Christians are supposed to do. Isn't like nice Christianity supposed to be about avoiding confrontation?
Yeah. Well, that is what we're taught when we're growing up, isn't it? But those of us who might pay a little attention to that recognize exactly what happens to Marty's dad, and that's it
Mhm.
by avoiding conflict. and you end up in even worse places frequently. That it actually makes the situation a lot worse. I would say that the way that the way that George McFly handled it
Mhm.
was not good, because it ultimately came down to violence, which is his way of handling the conflict. But I think as good Christians, addressing conflict directly in a kind and caring and loving way, having conversation, and really letting each other know that we care about them, we care about how they fit into the community, and trying to work through it, and hearing each other and trying to understand each other is certainly the way we should do it. And it's so unfortunate that for so long churches have taught just to be kind and nice and turn the other cheek, which is using turn the other cheek in completely the wrong way, because it leads to really bad situations, I think. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. The whole let's go sing nice hymns with nice people on Sunday morning and then leave. I think it's a problematic way and
Yeah,
isn't really an authentic way to follow Jesus.
no,
Just being nice, and what we mean by being nice is, I think. Uh, Not really being willing to engage with people and trying to be left alone. And I think about that verse in Matthew where Jesus says, where two or three are gathered in my name, I
mm,
am there among them. And a lot of times in church, what we do is we try to use that to make ourselves feel better if attendance is low. Like, well, where two or three are gathered, he's here
right,
among. But that was about confrontation, right? And
absolutely
about holding members accountable when they had
accountable. Yep.
misbehaved. And so I think actually accountability and confrontation about setting boundaries and enforcing them, I think is actually a very deep spiritual practice. And
Absolutely.
I think confrontation and accountability is extremely important and is one of the authentic ways to follow Jesus. So yeah, I think that avoiding confrontation is almost never helpful. It almost
Yeah.
never actually accomplishes anything other than to make things worse.
Worse. Yeah,
Like
I
the clear
completely agree.
communication is good.
Yeah.
You found that to be true too?
Oh, absolutely, over and over again, man. And a lot of it's a personal journey for me, because I
Yeah,
am very much like the McFlys. Like,
yeah.
I really don't like confrontation, and for a long period in my life, it was easier to kind of try to let it fade away. And I did learn over time that more times than not, it didn't really fade away. It just became a bigger and different problem that had to be got to the point that I didn't have any choice but to
Mm,
address it.
right, right. When it was much larger than it would have
Yeah,
been initially. Yeah, that's an
yeah,
important
for sure.
observation. So one of the other things, Mark, that we see at various times over the course of the movie is kind of some themes around sexual assault, which obviously
Yeah,
when I was watching this as a kid, I didn't necessarily catch or
pick up on, right?
understand in the same way. So do you think film deals with that in a healthy way? Thinking about sexual assault, or what do you think about the way that it handles it in general?
Well, the two scenes that I'm thinking of both involve Biff
Hmm.
assaulting Lorraine,
Hmm.
and boy, did they handle it well. I don't know if they handled it well. That the outcomes at least were someone intervening and trying to prevent the person who was being sexually aggressive from doing what they were doing. Um, I think that it was probably done with too much flippancy. It probably needed to be addressed more than just stopping it. There needed to be a lot more that goes on in terms of dialogue with the characters and addressing that issue. It's not a little issue. It's not Marty McFly decided to take a little drink from Lorraine's bottle that she saw from her mom's liquor cabinet. It's not a little thing. This is a major,
Right.
major issue that really impacts far too many people's lives. And I think it needed to be addressed a lot more directly. And there, if you're going to put it in there, then be willing to deal with it and not just kind of dismiss it real quickly with someone coming in and being a hero and a savior.
Yeah. And I
What do
think
you
that's
think?
the main problem that I had with it was the whole thought of the men coming in to be the savior. Because
Exactly.
even when we're not, we take Biff out of the equation and we're just talking about George and Marty, that Marty comes up with this plan that he's going to act like he's sexually assaulting his mother.
Yeah.
And George is supposed to come in and be the hero and take him out, and
Mhm.
kind of this display of masculinity is going to show that he can stand up for her, and that he can take care of her, and then that she's automatically going to go to him because he has saved her and he has earned her loyalty and affection. And I
very
think that's
80s
kind of
way of seeing it.
a very 80s way of seeing it, which is something that you and I talked about a little bit last week, which is whether or not this movie would work in in this day and age. Do you think it would, Mark? Because I agree that all of these things are very important and things that were kind of that the movie didn't really deal with. And yet at the same time, if the movie tried to deal with heavy things like this, it wouldn't be Back to the Future. So could this movie be made today in a way that is more culturally aware, more sensitive to some of the topics?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think it could be, but you'd have to leave some stuff out and find a different way of turning the story. Because as you said, if they did deal with it directly, it wouldn't be the same movie. It would change the movie. And there is something that's supposed to be hopeful about the overall feeling of this movie. And if we dug to, and I guess you could try to make that a little bit hopeful, but it would leave you in a weird place. So I think it would just have to be changed. If you're going, like I said, if you're going to put in parts about sexual assault, you best be ready to deal with it, to actually address the issue and not be flippant about it. And that's one of the, I do still think this is a fantastic movie, but that's one of the main issues that I have with it overall. And there's even this part of me that feels like it's very unfortunate that the rest of the movie is so great that so many of us almost just allow that to happen. We just kind of just go with it because everything else is so incredible. And there is an issue there, isn't there?
There definitely is. I think particularly around the way women are treated, and the way that we portray kind of this kind of toxic masculinity. I think there's a lot of issues there, and I would love to delve more deeply into that. I love talking about this movie, Mark, but we've got another segment to do, and we've got to get to that. We've got to get to the Make Me Look Stupid segment. So why don't we take a quick break and come back and try to make each other look stupid?
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for our Make Me Look Stupid segment where we commit to trying to make our co-host look stupid. So I am going to reward you today, Caleb. You did not steal any of my questions throughout the rest of the show. I was very impressed with that. I have 3 questions that I could ask here.
I didn't find a single one of them.
You didn't find any of them. I'm going to let you go first and have the opportunity to possibly steal one of those questions.
Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, this is kind of a commentary, I think, in some ways, on relationship of kids with their parents. And I'm curious, Mark, what do you think the movie is trying to say about that? What is the movie's position about relationships between children and parents? Or is it trying to make a commentary on that at all?
It is definitely trying to make a commentary on that. The whole reason the movie was made was because I don't remember which one, and maybe it was Zemeckis or the writer Gail. One of them went home and found their father's yearbook and saw a picture of their father. And their first thought was, Oh, me and my dad would not have been friends if we'd have been in high school. So, yeah, there's no doubt that that's it, because then he went back and talked to whichever other one, and he said, that's interesting. There might be something going on here, because my mom always misremembers who she was in high school. Like, she's always saying it was this, and then something pops up to show that she wasn't that. And so I think it's definitely trying to explore generational relationships and how we can be different, but also in particular father figures. Doc is obviously a father figure. When Marty is early in the movie, has a father that he's not really able to look completely up to. You can tell he's somewhat disappointed with how he handles himself. And so, yeah, it's definitely trying to deal with it. I think it's a little murky. There's several different messages of what that exploration is supposed to be about, but I don't think there's any doubt that that's what they're exploring. I mean, what's your take?
Yeah, I don't know that they were necessarily trying to make any commentary on parenting, other than that maybe who we see our parents as isn't who they were or even are. But, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about this and about parenting in general. And so I think one of the things that it tells me is that maybe in parenting, one of the best approaches is to try and be authentic about who you are, not to try and present yourself as someone who you aren't or weren't, like, say, Lorraine. I never parked with a boy. I never called a boy. I would never, but not to present yourself in a way that just isn't true, but to be authentic, to tell your story. And I think that goes a long way with kids at various stage in life.
And the good news is, as a person with adult kids, who I tried to be very authentic, I can tell you one of the things that leads to is that you actually get to be friends with your kids when they're adults, because who you are is who you were, and they can see and respect that, and you can build a much deeper relationship because of it. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. Okay, so I'm stuck in this conundrum. I've got 3 questions here,
and I didn't steal any of them.
You didn't steal any of them, and I kind of like them all. I'm going to ask you.
So you're going to ask all 3 of them?
I won't do that to you.
See what I mean, Mark? You always do this. Okay,
I won't do that to you. I am going to ask you to pick a number 1 through 3, and I'm going to ask you that question.
Okay, 3. Number 3.
All right. Why did Marty think at the end of the movie, when he realizes he's in a time machine, that, quote, when he knows he wants to get back and save Doc Brown from everything, why did he think, knowing that the DeLorean shows up where it, like, in the same space at a different time, why did he think, quote,
10 minutes?
10 minutes ought to do it?
So I was yelling at Marty last night as I was watching it. You need more than 10 minutes. You're all the way across town, Marty.
Right.
Come on. And I mean, why not a day? Why not an hour?
Yeah.
And he knew that the DeLorean was not super reliable either.
Right.
So
might not start.
It may not start.
You might get there and not be able to. Yeah,
it was poor planning.
I actually think that it was intentional, that they did, like, they not just so that he would have to watch Doc get shot again. I actually think they were playing into who his character was. I mean, think about it. We start the movie off with him being late to school. He is late to meet Doc because he stays at the ball, the prom, for far too long. I think this is a character trait, that he's just not very good with time. Like, he doesn't quite understand how this, like, isn't it just sort of rich? It is sort of rich that in a movie about time travel, your main protagonist is bad with time. Kind of like it.
I applaud that, Mark. I love that, and that's
I kind of like it.
That's one of the things that's endearing about Marty, isn't it?
It is. It really is. All right. So anyway, we've had far too much fun. Let's talk about what we're going to do next week. You and I have actually talked a little bit about this, right?
Yeah, we have. And so this is a show that Mark, you have watched the first season of, but I was brand new too, and you helped me discover this. And I'm about halfway through the first season, and I have loved it too. So I think that anyone who's listening who hasn't watched it yet, it's going to be a real treat. It's
I like how you did
Sweet
that.
Tooth is the name of the show. Okay, it's kind of a post-apocalyptic show, which is something that we visit now and again here at the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Right.
A post-apocalyptic show where babies have started to be born as human-animal hybrids at the same time that a virus has attacked all of humanity with the sick. And we've seen a lot of humanity die. And so it is the tale of Sweet Tooth and Big Guy traveling in this post-apocalyptic world. And it's making commentary on a lot of stuff, but it's also a lot of fun. And would you agree, Mark, that it's kind of a fun watch?
Oh, it's a lot of fun. And there's a little kind of sad sweetness about it at the same time. Part of what he's out in this new world trying to explore is why did this hybrid thing happen and what's the origins of all of this? And so it's really kind of a self-development exploratory story, but it's so sweet, it's so fun, and it's visually just stunning, I think. Don't you? I mean, to say that an apocalyptic show is visually like stunning in a positive way, not in a oh my gosh, look at the destruction. It's a brilliant show. I'm really looking forward to it.
I am too. I can't wait to delve into that. And I can't wait to watch the next season and a half to get ready for it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I cannot wait. So the next Moonshine Jesus Show will be looking at Sweet Tooth. We're going to talk about both season 1 and season 2. So make sure you block off some time to watch it with us so that you can be on board before we spoil it for you, right?
That's right. Mark, before you give the Moonshine Jesus Show call out, because I can tell you're getting ready to, there's something that I feel like I have to say that I didn't get to say this whole podcast talking about Back to the Future. I feel like I have to just say, Great Scott! This has been a good show, right?
Absolutely.
Great Scott!
Great Scott! And we are so glad that you are all here with us for the show. We thank you. Once again, we don't do this show without y'all. You make it all possible. We get to have all this fun. We get to geek out. We get to talk theological stuff and political stuff. So thank you for watching the Moonshine Jesus Show. And until next time, we'll see you on, again, the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine